You are listening to the Healing Migraines Naturally podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie Caesar, and I'm helping women rediscover a migraine-free life. Today I'm talking to Mary, who runs our awesome Facebook community, about weather-related migraines. How are you, Mary?
I'm doing good. Much better.
Yeah, you and I both got COVID.
Yep, it kind of got my whole family here, but all of us are back up on the upswing, I guess you could say.
Good. Yeah, we are too. But for regular listeners of the podcast, you might have noticed that we haven't been dropping a new episode every week. That's because first I went down and then Mary went down.
Yeah, and
So we had to slow down the drops a little bit.
Yeah, it took a few weeks to get us all back to normal. I know, Leslie, you were saying that you didn't even have a voice. So, we couldn't have even talked if we tried.
Exactly.
So, and I probably would have been a coughing mess for everyone. So, here we are. We're back.
Right.
We missed you all, and we're sorry.
Well, good. Today we're going to talk about weather-related migraines. What do you think? Pretty common problem, huh?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting in our group that we see so often, talk about checking the barometer and, storms. I often see people say things like, oh, we're getting bad weather here. Here comes the migraines. So yeah, people are pretty on edge when the weather is changing.
And it's interesting because you can't control the weather.
We try.
Exactly. We try to control a lot of things, right?
Yeah,
Whether appropriately or maybe not so appropriately. We try to control a lot of things, but the weather is just one of those things that you absolutely cannot control.
Yeah, it's so true.
But yeah, I've seen, certainly I've had many clients over the years that notice a correlation between weather changes, severe weather, thunderstorms, barometric pressure drops, and their migraines. And then certainly in the Facebook group, as you said, this is a real common post. A lot of times people will even kind of share their location, hey, I'm in Kansas City. Anybody else? Anybody else here in Kansas City as we get these thunderstorms, etc. That's a fairly common post.
Well, and on top of that, I've actually seen posts about where should I move to avoid the weather? Where's the best weather for migraine sufferers? And I'm like, boy, that is a lot. That's expensive. That's a lot of time, money, pressure. It's just a lot to try and move away from something you have no control over.
100%. And, there's weather every place on the planet.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have had a couple clients over the years where they actually did move and, continue to get migraines because, like I say, there's weather everywhere.
Everywhere, right. That's interesting. Did the frequency change at all, or was it a little better or a little worse? Or
Well, it's interesting because usually what happens is people will go on a vacation and they'll say, hey, I went to vacation in Phoenix and I didn't get any migraines while I was there. And so this starts people questioning, okay, is there something about the climate? Is there something about the altitude, that is more compatible with my body? And is that why I didn't get migraines when we were on that trip? And again, like we've talked about in other podcasts, when we are in pain, physical pain or mental or emotional pain, our mind tries to figure out why. And so, right, if we go to Phoenix for 2 weeks and don't get a migraine, and we normally have a migraine every other day, the mind is going to latch onto that because the mind is always looking for, why am I in this pain? If I could just figure it out, then I could avoid that one thing that's causing the pain. And so the mind will latch on to that.
So do you think the ones that, when you go on vacation, do you think it's more of a less stress situation than the actual weather and altitude? Or
Well, yeah, so we're going to talk about this. I have my, theory on this.
Yes. I'm jumping way ahead of you. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. No, that's the question, right? So why did that happen to me? Why did I have a 2-week reprieve in a particular location? Sometimes it's the beach. I have clients, whenever I'm at the beach, I feel better. I don't get migraines, right? So what's going on there?
Me too. I'm 100% better at the beach.
So why don't we dive in here, huh? Why don't we talk through weather-related migraines?
Yeah, it really does like just crack open my brain of like so many questions. So bring it on.
Okay, good.
So many questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about weather-related migraines, I want to focus mostly on the third principle that we have to work on to restore and maintain our health. So for those of you that have been following the podcast or seen some of my free trainings, you will remember that there are three things that we have to do to restore and maintain our health, and I call these the three principles. So, the first principle, just to recap, the first principle is getting the nutrients to every cell in the body. Second principle is clearing metabolic waste material. And the third principle is restoring our resiliency and vitality. So, this weather migraine phenomenon, this is really centered within that third principle. It is related to our own resiliency and vitality. So, let's dive in here a little bit deeper into this third principle.
Tell me everything. Yeah.
So, our own resiliency and vitality keeps us in a state of health, keeps us in balance, in homeostasis. So, there's an organizing energy, if I can use that word. There's an organizing energy to every living system, and we are no exception to that. So, you can see this in things like a beehive. So, you have a beehive. I don't know how many bees are in a beehive, 5,000? So you have 5,000 individual insects, and somehow the honey gets made. There's an organizing energy to the beehive that keeps all of those individual actors in balance and homeostasis, keeps the hive in a state of health. So we are no exception to that, but we are way more complex than a beehive. We have 30 to 40 trillion cells. We have likely even more bacterial cells and viruses that live in us. That's kind of staggering. And then we have our mental and emotional component as well. Okay. So we are unbelievably complex. So there's this organizing energy that keeps everything in homeostasis, keeps everything in balance. So that can be robust or it can be kind of flagging. It can be coming up a little bit short.
So one of your bees is out of alignment.
Well, yeah, exactly. One of the bees is
One of
off
your
in
bees
the
has gone
right,
rogue.
way out there in the field.
Probably maybe more than that. Maybe 100 bees have gone rogue.
Yeah, exactly. So when we are in a state of health, when we are in homeostasis, in balance, it's sort of like our needle is pointing north. Okay, so I want you to think of like you've got a little needle, a little compass. And when you are in a state of health, that needle is pointing north. It's in the green zone. You feel good, your body is not generating symptoms. So that needle is continuously getting pushed down towards west by stressors. Okay, physical stressors, mental stressors, emotional stressors, these are part of life. You cannot avoid them. And so those stressors are continuously kind of knocking our needle out of balance towards west, knocking it down. It's our own resiliency and vitality that counters that and pushes our needle back up to north. So those of us that are prone to migraines, this includes you, Mary, you're a little bit prone to migraines too. So
Yes,
it's
yes,
sort of
yeah.
like all of us that are prone to migraines, we've got a little red zone northwest on the compass that says migraine zone. And when our needle goes into that migraine zone, we're going to experience those migraine symptoms that we are predisposed to. And we migraine sufferers, those of us that are prone to migraines, we can kind of feel this, right? Because this is right when the needle first enters the red zone. I call that the uh-oh moment, right?
Uh-oh,
Uh-oh.
yep.
Uh-oh,
Yep.
can I see properly? Are my glasses smudged? Uh-oh, what's going on? That's like that first little indication we're just on the border of that little red zone. And then we could be, if our needle goes all the way down into our migraine zone, this is when we're, vomiting, right?
Rain
Pacing, whatever it may be.
ice caps.
Exactly, right. So we migraine sufferers, those of us that are prone to migraines, we can kind of feel where our needle is. It's a very unique symptom that we are predisposed to. So the real healing takes place when we restore our resiliency and vitality. Okay, so if we just work on the first principle and the second principle, we actually don't feel better. We have to get our needle back to north. So you have to work on all three of these principles at the same time. The cells have to have what they need to function properly, and our cells can't be swimming in waste material. But we also have to have the resiliency and vitality to push our needle back to north.
And I told you I actually did that about a week or within last week where I was getting stress from every direction. And I went into that uh-oh moment and I was like thinking of Leslie, of course. I'm like, uh-oh, here's the uh-oh. And I was trying to work and, behind on everything. And all of a sudden I'm like, I can't see. And I knew it's one of those moments where you're just like, if I don't do something super fast, I'm going to be in full blown misery and pain for a while, so no fun. I couldn't even see my computer. It was all like geometric shapes at that point. Ugh, the worst.
Yeah. So, right, your first thing when your needle tips into that red migraine zone, your first symptom is that aura, right? That's right, the beginnings of that aura. And if your needle keeps going down, right, then you're going to have the real bad one.
Yeah, in bed, can't move. Have to lay there until it passes migraine. Super fun.
And then, right, again, when it passes, there can be like a hangover effect as that needle starts to go towards north, right? We're not as bad. The needle's kind of moving back towards north. We go through a hangover zone. And then once we get out of it, we're good. We're good to go. It's another really interesting feature of migraines, right? When we feel good, we feel good.
Yeah, that's true. And then that makes you kind of crazy trying to figure out when that's going to happen and why and all that, which, like we've talked about many, many times, we just don't always have control over, you can't avoid all the foods and all the weather and all of the other, it's just hard.
You can't. And you can't avoid those stressors, right? You said everything was coming at you, right? So things were coming at you on the mental and emotional side, causing mental and emotional stress. You can't avoid that either, right? We try to bubble wrap ourselves. We try to, no, please nobody get me upset here, right? But it's inevitable. That's part of life. So with the barometric pressure changes, with the weather changes, so the barometric pressure changing, the wind blowing, a lot of people will get a migraine if they are out in the wind too long. So these different weather phenomenon, those are physical stressors, right? The barometric pressure changing, that's a physical stressor in the environment. So there are a lot, we are continuously being bombarded by sensory impressions. Those are physical stressors on our body, right? We have, the light hitting our retina. That's a physical stressor. You breathe in, a perfume molecule. That's a physical stressor. You sit too long at a desk and you hold yourself in kind of a funny position. That puts a physical stress on the body, right? So we are continuously experiencing these little physical stressors.
Right. And sometimes we don't really think about the tiny stressors. Like nobody thinks about the light hitting your retina. When I think of stress, I think of my 2 laptops breaking and making it hard to work. Like it's big stuff that we usually, are facing. But the tiny things like wind or allergens or the sun being too bright or too dark or like overcast or like the list can go on when it's a small stressor.
Exactly. So then we have different sensitivities to these stressors. So some people are particularly sensitive to different types of stressors. And so, like, noise is one. So, like, for me, if I have a lot of stressors hitting me, maybe some things, on the mental and emotional side, and then if I have all these little noises, like maybe my daughter is, kind of making a lot of noise as a child does, right? So she's not really doing anything unusual, but to me, I'm getting irritated, right? Oh, this noise, right? Oh, geez, please, just, right? So please be quiet. So we can even feel, right? We can become, so some people will be particularly sensitive to particular stressors, or it's like, oh yeah, once a bunch of straws kind of get on that camel's back, then I get even more sensitive to some of these small things that normally I wouldn't be that sensitive to. So with the weather, there are some people, so everybody, like when that barometric pressure change comes through, when the wind comes through, everyone is exposed to that physical stressor. Some people are going to be more sensitive to that particular stressor. It's going to have more of an effect on their needle.
Just thinking about how some people feel it in their joints. Like I feel a storm coming in
Yes, exactly, right?
in our joints. But, then there's migraine sufferers that just feel the uh-oh moment coming on.
Exactly, right? So some people are predisposed to joint pain, right? And then if they're also particularly sensitive to the physical stressor of that barometric pressure change, well, now that my needle moved into my joint pain zone and now my knees hurt, right? Absolutely. It's a great example, right? Because a lot of times, those of us that are prone to migraines, we feel like we're the only person sensitive. Why am I like this? Why does my body hate me? How come everybody else can dance in the rain but me, right? But other people are everybody is exposed to these stressors. Some people are going to be sensitive to these stressors too. They are just predisposed to different symptoms, right? Some people have a lot of anxiety when storms come through, right? Because they're prone to anxiety. When their needle gets in the anxiety zone, they're going to feel anxious. And so you have people, right, with that barometric pressure change that pushes their needle down because it's a physical stressor. And if it pushes them into their anxiety zone, they're going to have anxiety during that storm.
That's such an interesting point because I definitely notice when the weather is weird outside, it's almost like your mood matches the weather. You know what I mean?
For some people, yeah, some people they love storms, right? And they love to see, right? You got storm trackers, right? They don't get depressed when the clouds roll in. They're like excited, right? Oh, let's hop in the car, right? So yes, so if someone is predisposed towards, anxiety, right? Low mood, whatever it may be, if that physical stressor pushes their needle down into that zone, they're going to experience that symptom. So we migraine sufferers, like I say, sometimes we kind of get a little self-pitying, nobody else struggles like I do, but people do, right? We just happen to be predisposed to this, really obvious symptom of migraine, but people are
And
predisposed to more subtle
extremely,
symptoms too.
yeah, extremely painful too. Like there's
Exactly.
I mean, I'm not immune to anxiety by any means, and like when I get that, I can still function. But when you get into a knockout migraine, it's hard. It's really hard to face the day when you can't even get out of bed. So I feel for people when they are down like that, for
For
sure.
sure. For sure. Absolutely. So the answer to this is to restore, improve, increase our resiliency and vitality. So we want to restore our resiliency and vitality. That's really the answer to this. Okay. Then we can weather the physical stress.
Sorry, I had to giggle.
Oh, yeah.
No pun
No pun
intended.
intended. Then we can weather the
We can
physical
weather.
stress of the
Did you
weather, right?
plan that?
I know, right? So, and this applies to other stressors like altitude. Okay. Some people are very sensitive to the physical stressor of changing altitude.
It just makes my head swim though, because it's like, okay, we're going on vacation and we change location and we're not in the same situation as usual, so we don't get migraines. Is it, like I said, the lack of stress, or like, I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my brain around why the body is so much like a light switch in that situation.
Well, yeah. So, and this is the thing, right? Like you said, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. This is what our mind always is trying to do, right? Like what is the deal? So, my theory on this is that when we take a trip, there can be a couple different things going on here. So, one, we may be less stressed. And so, if we don't have additional stressors pushing the needle down, it doesn't tax our resiliency and vitality so much. And so, then the weather comes through in Phoenix and you say, oh, whoa, I didn't get a migraine here with this weather. But really, we were sort of less stressed. We were on vacation. We didn't have the day to day cares. And so we didn't have so many straws on the camel's back, so to speak. Our resiliency and vitality hadn't already been at work trying to counter these mental and emotional stressors, let's say. So that could be one aspect. Now, there's another very interesting aspect to migraines. We sort of can have a false resiliency and vitality. So, for most of us who are prone to migraines, if we have something that has to get done, we'll get it done. and then we'll crash. We'll meet the deadline up for work on Friday, and then we're down for the count Saturday and Sunday
For
over the
weekend.
weekend.
Seriously, no one is more determined and more strong. That didn't come out right, but than a migraine warrior. Like, we know they just push through and do the best they can, for sure.
So we can kind of rally like a false resiliency and vitality. So when we can make it through to Friday, we are actually keeping our needle up out of migraine zone. Okay, that's why we're not getting the migraine. So it's sort of like we are willpowering that needle up out of the zone. But then, as soon as we don't have to exert that willpower anymore, poof, that false resiliency and vitality is not there. And then our needle goes down and then we crash. And so, this is commonly called like a letdown migraine or a letdown effect.
I can totally see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this could be at play during a vacation too, right? It's like, I'm with the family, I'm with the kids, we paid a lot of money for this. There's no way I'm going to miss out on this, right? It's
I'll
like,
be
I'm just going
damned
to.
if I don't see Mickey Mouse. That's where I'm at.
Correct. Exactly, right? I'm going on Space Mountain whether it kills me, right? So we can have kind of like this false resiliency and vitality that we can muster up. Can't muster it up forever, but a lot of times we can muster this up and we can get through the crisis, we can get through the how many clients, the day after the graduation and the graduation party, boom. Right? I know I'm going to be out on a migraine, right? Because it's like we can muster through the graduation ceremony and the party and this and that, and then we're going to be down for the count. So that could be a reason why, right? People go on a trip and they don't get a migraine either because they kind of have like a false resiliency and vitality. Now, again, our mind, right? This does not satisfy the mind. The mind is not going there. Right? The mind goes, well, how come when I was so stressed out to get all that done on Friday, I never got a migraine? And then I got a migraine when everything was, cool. Right, this is what the mind says. It can't be stress related because I got the migraine after the stress. So those are potential things, what's going on there when we go on a trip and don't experience a migraine, right? It can be a false vitality. The other thing is also that some people in certain environments, they sort of naturally have an affinity towards that. And this is documented in the homeopathic literature, for example. Some people, part of what you might call their constitution, they might just feel better at the ocean, right? It's just part of their constitution. And so that could be a factor too. You just sort of constitutionally feel a little bit better at this altitude, or you feel a little bit better at the beach or in certain environments. And so that could be a factor too.
But you've said multiple times, like with food, you should, if your body is healthy and in alignment, you should be able to manage eating at a restaurant. It's kind of the same concept. If you're in a healthy state of your body, you should be able to manage different altitudes and different barometric pressures. Is that
correct? You will be able to. So what we want to have, right? We want to have enough resiliency and vitality to meet the challenges of life, the stressors of life. And so if we are getting, kind of knocked down all the time, that's an indication that we're lacking in resiliency and vitality, and that can be improved. We can sort of replenish that, we can kind of fill that bucket up, that resiliency and vitality bucket up. But I see this. In fact, I just got a message from a client over the weekend. We were going to meet yesterday and she needed to reschedule. And she said, you know what? I'm doing well. We actually had some storms come through and I'm actually feeling fine, right? This is somebody who used to, every time there was a weather incident, right? She's getting a migraine. So in the course of our work, she has increased her resiliency and vitality, right? She can withstand the physical stress of all of the barometric pressure changes, et cetera, that goes into the weather. The other thing is, with this particular client, she was very susceptible to going into stores, and the fluorescent lighting. Okay. So again, that light hitting the retina, fluorescent lighting, it's a different type of stressor. It's a different type of light hitting our retina compared to sunlight, right? So some people are very sensitive to that type of light, it pushes their needle down. They have to have resiliency and vitality to counter that. And so in this case, she was very sensitive to that type of thing too. She couldn't go to 2 stores. She could only go to 1 store, and then she'd have to come back, right? And so that is improving too. A few weeks ago, I was able to go to a couple different stores. Fantastic. So that's an indication that her resiliency and vitality has improved because she can weather those stressors better. So, we get into, so what our mind does, let's go back to where our mind goes, because I think this is really important. So our mind goes, okay, I was in the fluorescent lighting and I didn't feel well. Okay, wherever I can turn fluorescent lights off, I'm going to turn them off. And then wherever I don't have control over the fluorescent lighting, I'm going to wear sunglasses. Right? The mind goes into this mode. It's a problem-solving mode. How do I eliminate the thing that made me feel bad? That's exactly what the mind is going to do. How can I avoid the thing that made me feel bad so I don't feel bad?
I mean, it makes sense. Like we've talked about before, it's how our brains are built to survive.
Correct.
But is it actually functioning for us? Can you really avoid like all fluorescent lights, all perfume, all whatever, fill in the blank?
Yeah, you can't avoid it if you want to interact with your family, right? If you want to interact with your friends, if you want to go to work,
If you
it's
have a
like,
job,
right,
which most of us need.
Exactly, right? So this is the mindset that we get into, right? Like, how do I avoid the light? What sunglasses do I need? What blue light blockers do I need for my screen, for my computer screen, right? It's like we're trying to avoid the stressor. That's what the mind directs us to do. But like I say, you can't bubble wrap yourself. This is what it leads to, right? Our world starts getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, I can't go in that store because of the lighting. I can't go anywhere where somebody might have perfume. I can't go down the detergent aisle in the grocery store. I can't go to more than 2 stores at once. It's like our world just gets smaller and smaller and smaller because our mind is directing us to avoid all of these stressors.
I think that's one of the saddest parts of being a migraine sufferer. Like I've told you before, I only get them maybe a few times a year, but I can completely understand and imagine if you get them daily or weekly, how sad it is that your world gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah, it
To the point
really
where
does.
some of our Facebook group people don't even leave beds,
Yeah, for sure.
and that's just no way to live.
I've had, clients over the years, they can't go out and do too much at all. And it's very isolating. People feel very ashamed, very guilty because, they can't interact with their husband, with their children, with their friends. Friendships are gone. It's no way to live. But if we follow what the mind is telling us to do, unfortunately, this is where it leads. Because if something, right, this whole problem kicks off because something is draining our resiliency and vitality. So the mind is not looking at, okay, what's draining my resiliency and vitality? How do I patch that hole up? And how do I fill this bucket up again so that I can go out in the sun and the wind and the rain and the altitude and the whole bit, right? Our mind is avoid, avoid, avoid. So we're not actually doing what we need to do, which is restore our resiliency and vitality, identify what's draining our resiliency and vitality so that we can weather these stressors. No pun intended.
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I love a good pun. But here's the thing, like the words resiliency and vitality, like I've heard that probably hundreds of times through our podcast right now. But I can honestly tell you, I don't think I've ever heard anyone in my life say those words before or tell me how do you do that? Like what is this magic formula? And I know it's probably very involved, like, well, maybe not involved, but like a process. It takes time. But I can honestly say I've never once heard anyone talk to me about how I needed to restore that. Not once, So it's not something that you naturally are going to be like, oh, I better be working on my resiliency today. Like it's just not a common thought.
Yes. So this is, frankly, this is one of the things that make what I do so unique because you are correct. Nobody is addressing this, particularly when it comes to our health or the symptoms that we experience. And this is a big missing. This is why people struggle with getting better. So I will try to answer your question as best as I can. So first of all, we can have habits that are either resiliency promoting or resiliency draining. So I'll give a real obvious habit. So our sleep habits. It's very easy with like our phones. I will do this. You're going to go to sleep. Oh, let me just check Facebook real quick. Oh, let me, check out that blog that I follow. Let me see if there's any new posts. Oh, let me see, if any of my friends texted me anything funny, right? It's like we check our phones and then, 45 minutes later, oh my goodness, right?
Is that all? I feel like they're doing real good if they're only 45 minutes
right?
later.
So now we've kind of missed the natural rhythm of when our melatonin, when our cortisol, when our hormones are sort of preparing us to sleep. We've missed that window. So then our body says, oh, I guess she's going to stay up. Well, I better keep the cortisol pumping. I better lower the melatonin. Okay. Now we're keyed up. So now it's like, well, now I can't go to sleep. Well, maybe I'll watch TV, right? And then it kind of snowballs. And then before you know it,
Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm I'm over here going, I feel like you see me.
right? Do I have a camera?
Are you
Right.
spying on me at night? This is like literally word for word my routine every night. Like I get to a point where I'm so tired that I go crash into bed, and then in order to get my brain to slow down, I'm like, oh, I'll just read a little. And then that tiredness passes, and then I'm like, ping, like ready to, let's go paint a wall because I've got all the energy in the world now.
Right, yeah, let's hit the clean out the closets. Let's get the basement organized, right?
Yes.
Right. So then before we
Guilty.
know it, right, it's like midnight. We're finally falling asleep. Well, we got to get up at 5:30 in the morning to go to work. So, obviously, if we don't get enough sleep, right, this is going to be a big vitality drain on us. Okay. We have to have adequate sleep for cellular repair. I mean, I could go on and on. So if we have sleep habits that are not health supporting, that are actually resiliency and vitality draining, that's like a little hole in the bottom of our vitality bucket. And so then our vitality is going to start to get drained. So we have habits, right? We can have certain habits. I call these physical habits. So like our eating habits or our sleep habits would be like physical habits. Then we can have mental and emotional habits. Nobody really thinks about mental and emotional habits, right? But we get in the habit of thinking a certain way. We get in the habit of feeling a certain way or responding emotionally in certain situations in a certain way. So those mental and emotional habits can be like a hole in the bottom of that bucket and drain our vitality as well. And you can probably, right? You might think, oh yeah, I can feel drained after certain mental and emotional experiences or grooves that I get into, right?
Nobody growing up for me, like nobody taught me that you can choose to change your thoughts. Like that's something that I have had to work on and think through and figure out in my 40s. And I mean my 29s. But like yeah, like nobody teaches you that you're like in control and you get to choose whether you want to talk to yourself in a certain way or whether or not you want to believe the thoughts that come into your head, because not everything you think is true, right?
Right. Or we get in the habit, again, those of us that are prone to migraines, we are really great at this. I'm just going to power through. We get in the habit almost. I'm just going to power through, right? We can get in the habit of not listening to the feedback that our body is sending us. So we have these habits, and I consider those habits more on the mental and emotional side, right? Those can be vitality draining. Now, if it were so easy, as you know from your own personal work on this, if only it were so easy that somebody tell us, well, just stop talking to yourself like that, right? It
Right.
takes,
Think happy
yeah,
thoughts.
no, it takes a lot of work, right? It takes a lot of work to work through what is kind of driving me on the unconscious level to push through, right? What is driving that, right? And so that's going to be a unique reason depending on the person, right? There's some there's common themes amongst us that are prone to that, but the real root of that is going to be unique depending on the person. And so to patch like that little hole up, we've got to get to that unique, what is that little unique reason that's motivating this person to ignore all the feedback that their wonderful body is trying to tell them to push through to hit that Friday? deadline. All right. That little reason in the unconscious, that's going to be very unique to each person. And for a lot of people, until they get that, and like I say, this is what makes my work unique because I help guide people. Okay, what is in there that's motivating me to engage in this vitality draining habit or behavior?
I know, like, for example, some people learn as a child that their worth comes through being of service to others, or that their worth and validation comes from achievement. So that, there's a constant drive to, be successful, and you can't be successful if you're not meeting deadlines. It's just like an internal pressure, right?
Exactly. So, we want to be able to accomplish things in our life, but if there's sort of a middle ground with that, right? There's the person who lacks any sort of drive, can't meet any commitment, right? That's sort of like out of balance on one side. But then we can go out of balance on the other side where, we ignore clear feedback. We burn ourselves out. We sacrifice things to hit that deadline, right? We want to be in the middle, right? We want to take that middle path.
And what is it? I mean, I don't know what happened historically with women here, but like there's just something in women that we don't allow ourselves to stop and take care of ourselves until we break. It's like until you get to the point where your needle is going off the charts in West Zone, it's like, oh, we're not allowed to take care of ourselves until everyone and everything around us is taken
Yeah.
care of.
Well, and I think I'm glad you bring this up. This is something that I do like to talk about and have had this conversation with many clients over the years. So, we women, we are wired, the human animal, the female human animal takes care of the babies. And so, if somebody doesn't respond to the baby when the baby is crying and take care of the baby's needs, the baby dies. So, evolutionarily, right, if the human female did not have the ability to, it's 3 in the morning. I'd much rather sleep right now, but the baby's crying. So, right. We women have that ability. I'm sure we've noticed with our husbands, they're not, a lot of times we kind of blame our husbands, why won't he get up at 3 in the morning? They are not wired to get up at 3 in the morning and take care of the baby. Women are wired
Yeah,
to do that.
I lucked out with my husband that he would let me sleep in the morning. I feel like I'm like I got up with the babies all night, but he was wonderful about letting me sleep and taking care of the babies in the morning.
Yes.
So
Yes. And that's great. But there's something, right? Like, even, when my daughter was a baby, even if my husband did get up in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. There's no way I could fall back asleep. There's no way. Right? Because right,
it's
my
so
daughter
cool.
cried, forget it. Forget it. It was not under my control at all.
It's funny because I'm over here going, it's probably because they're doing it wrong or something. No.
Well, but again, right? It's like this is, you can see this other animals, right? In this day and age, a lot of people get very upset if kind of make a statement like this about the human animal, but you can see the division of labor as far as child rearing in other animals. And so we have inherited that. And so there's something, I think, evolutionarily that we women have the ability. It's easier for us. It comes more easily to us to sacrifice ourselves because somebody, right, to keep the baby alive, you're going to have to sacrifice. There's no way. Right. And that goes back, chimps have to do this. Gorillas have to do this. Monkeys have to do this. Right. This is not just unique to humans. Somebody has to sacrifice to make sure that that child survives. And so we are a little bit predisposed to this. And this is one reason why women have different health concerns, different health, they tend to get different health problems than men do because we can get a little bit out of balance on that. Right? If it's easier for us to sacrifice, again, we want to keep that kind of in balance. We don't want to go too far on that self-sacrificing. And it's easier for us to do that than for men.
Yeah, you got me on this like tangent in my head where I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Where it is interesting. Yes, we're both human, but the health problems that we deal with are so different. Like, just for example, when a woman gains weight versus a man gaining weight. My dear sweet husband is all belly. And I'm like, all butts in the thighs, It's like, it's interesting that our bodies genuinely are different, and not saying, we're not trying to make a negative statement about that, but it's true. There is a difference biologically that we can't change.
Correct. So, the healing process, right, includes, okay, what is draining my vitality? And it could be some habits that we are engaged in, but there are these things on the mental and emotional side that, for most of my clients, there's something on the mental and emotional side that's draining their vitality. And if we don't address that, we're not going to feel better. And this
Right.
is why, yeah, go
So
ahead.
I was just going to ask you, like, so even if you get all of the nutrients to the body and all of the waste out of like, you can do your liver detox and your nutritional supplements and all of the things that everyone out in the supplement world or in the nutritional world wants you to do, it's not going to be complete unless you take that third step. It's not going to fix the problem. You can't detox your liver into being better. Like, that's just one example of things that people try,
Yeah, so this is really prominent. We did a podcast on functional medicine. So, functional medicine, there's some similarities within functional medicine within what I call the first principle and the second principle. They're not identical. I don't do functional medicine, but there's some similarities there. So, and in functional medicine, like I talked about in that podcast, the approach is to run typically thousands of dollars worth of lab work and then go in and try to correct the lab work with a natural substance. So, kind of manipulate the biochemistry with a natural substance. That's kind of the core of a functional medicine approach. And so that's within those first and second principles, because we're in that functional medicine approach, they're kind of like pumping nutrients into the body to change the biochemistry, and they may or may not be doing things to support clearing metabolic waste material. So what I have seen many times over the years is that when people do that approach, okay, so they run all of this testing, the testing comes back, oh, you have this, bad bacteria in your digestive tract, and you have these neurotransmitters that are, high or low, and you have these nutrients that are high or low, all these different things come back on the labs. And so then they take all of these natural substances, natural supplements to try to manipulate that. So then they'll rerun the test in, say, 6 months. Okay, let's rerun the test. Let's spend another couple $1,000s, and then let's see where your levels are. So many times the levels will now be normal because you've manipulated the biochemistry with all these natural supplements. The levels will be normal and people will not feel better.
So there's
something missing, right? You have to, this organizing energy has to be in balance and homeostasis, right? That organizing energy has to be keeping all the bees in the hive and not, one out in left field. Now, again, we have to have our cells have to have the nutrients that they need to function in order for the cells to function properly. And the cells can't be swimming in metabolic waste material. We have to have physical things in place as well, but we have to have our resiliency and vitality in alignment too, in place as well. You have to have all three pieces in place.
Right. And then just back to the whole weather thing, if you are in the homeostasis, why is it so hard to say? Place of homeostasis, the weather shouldn't knock you off your game.
Correct.
As easily.
Because when the weather comes through, our resiliency and vitality counters the weather. Just like my client that messaged me over the weekend, right? It's, I didn't do anything to change weather. Like, the weather was going to happen. The butterfly flapped its wings in Mexico 6 weeks ago, and now, the weather came through her area. She and we have absolutely no control over that. There's no, miracle herb from the Amazon that no one else knows about that prevents us from being susceptible to the weather, right? I mean, it just doesn't exist, right? It's our own resiliency and vitality. And with this client, her resiliency and vitality has improved, and she can feel it, right? Because she can feel it in other areas of her life, because she can go to a couple stores now, and she can, take a trip in the car. And, there's other things that are going on in her life too that are clear indicators that she has more resiliency and vitality. So, right, the car drive didn't change. The stores still have their lighting, right? It's not like Trader Joe's went in and changed out all of their lighting and now it doesn't bother her anymore, right? It's the same environment, and yet she feels better.
I think it's interesting that probably nobody would think of that as like a test for how you're functioning, but it seems like a drive to the store to Trader Joe's and the fluorescent lights are a better test of how her body is doing than the functional medicine tests that you were
Right,
talking about.
exactly.
It's just
100%.
very interesting.
Right, is right. You nailed it. You nailed it, right?
Yeah, very interesting.
So yeah, you do, like, let's say, like in this case, somebody like this, they went to a functional medicine practitioner. Oh, let's do a neurotransmitter test. So again, can you go in a grocery store? We don't need to spend $700 on a neurotransmitter test. Can you go in a grocery store and tolerate the lighting? That's the question.
And I know you said you can tell how somebody is getting their nutrients because all you have to do is talk to them about their digestive issues, and you're like, yep, you got problems there. Like, you don't
Right.
need thousands of dollars of testing to figure some of this out, right?
If you have gas and bloating and you don't have a bowel movement but 2 times a week, I don't need a stool test. We've got a problem with the digestive function. It's pretty obvious, right?
Don't need to make any more noise in that.
Right. Well, very good. What do you think, Mary? Do you think we covered it?
I do. I think it was very interesting. And just as a side note, I wanted to give a shout out to our listeners that have given us some awesome feedback. And we just wanted to say we love you and we appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's been fun to hear some of the things that people are sharing back, I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we really do appreciate your kind words. I know a lot of you have really enjoyed the podcast. We're kind of coming up on 6 months now since we launched. So I can't believe it's 6 months already. It seems like just a month ago we started this, but it's been really fun and we've gotten some great feedback. So it's been really gratifying to both of us.
It definitely helps me when people give us little feedback because I'll be honest, never once in my life did I think I would say, I'm a podcaster. This is so in left field for me. So it's just fun to hear that people are enjoying it.
Yeah, right? You do something and you put it out there and on the internet and you never know if anybody's even going to hear it, right?
Right. Yeah, it's been really just a wild ride, as they say.
Well, very good. Well, thanks again, Mary. We'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. We'll see you next time.
And thank you for listening. Before you go, be sure to like this episode and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and other popular podcast platforms. Do you have someone in your life who would benefit from what we talked about today? Please share it with them. Share on your social media. Share within other migraine Facebook groups that you are in. We really want to get the word out that you can recover your health and stop getting chronic migraines. And if you want to stay connected, join my free migraine Facebook group with over 11,000 women who are rediscovering a migraine-free life. Go to Healing Migraines Naturally with Leslie Caesar, ND, on Facebook or to healingmigrainesnaturally.com and we'll redirect you to the Facebook group.